Can you feel that? The Stanley Cup playoffs are finally here. It's the best time of the year. No offense to Christmas and Easter and Halloween, Thanksgiving, all the other holidays, but sorry, this is the best time of the year for me. Now, for me in particular, of course, it's been a really good 3 years. My Tampa Bay Lightning have gone to 3 straight Stanley Cups, won 2 of them, and I'm still a little disappointed on the finish with last year against the Colorado Avalanche, but I mean, you got to give someone else a turn, right? Well, the Lightning are certainly back in, but this is a hard one. I don't think there's ever an easy year to pick how the Stanley Cup playoffs are going to go. The postseason is a completely different beast. But this year in particular, it feels more difficult. It feels like the quality of hockey is so far above and beyond what you would usually expect from even just the first round. But for me, it's kind of this weird tale of two conferences between the East and the West. On the West side, you had a much tighter race all along, and things really weren't decided until the last handful of games of the regular season. And you had a couple teams that didn't make it in that a lot of us expected to along the way. I'm thinking of the Calgary Flames in particular. Who knows what the hell happened to them along the way? And then you had teams that seemed to come out of nowhere and defy expectations as a means of getting in. Look what the Seattle Kraken did this year, making the Stanley Cup playoffs in their second ever season. Now, granted, they fell a little bit behind Vegas and getting there in the first season, but I digress. They can make it up if they actually win the Cup this year. But then you go over to the East, and it is, whoo boy, that is an arms race if I've ever seen one. Boston, Toronto, New Jersey, the New York Rangers, all making tremendous moves at or before the trade deadline. Oh, and let's not forget that Boston had the actual best season that we've ever seen out of an NHL team ever. But don't let that confuse you. Do you think any Boston fan feels safe right now? No, of course not. On their way to the Stanley Cup final, if they make the Stanley Cup final, Boston has to go through Florida, who has been surging lately, either Tampa Bay or Toronto, and need I remind you again, Tampa Bay has been to 3 straight Stanley Cups and won 2 of them. And then in the Eastern Conference Final, they have to play whoever ends up coming out of the Metro, be it Carolina, either of the New York teams, or the New Jersey Devils. 4 teams that play a gritty, focused, defensive, playoff-style hockey. Boston is not assured to make it to the Eastern Conference Final or the Stanley Cup Final, regardless of what that season looks like. So with all that said, I'm going to try to remove myself from the equation as much as possible and focus on the series themselves and see what we can come up with. So let's go ahead and start in the Western Conference so I can delay picking the Tampa Bay-Toronto series. And we're going to start with the Colorado Avalanche taking on the Seattle Kraken. Last game of the season, Colorado clinches the Central Division, gets that number 1 spot, and the Seattle Kraken, as I mentioned, their first trip to the Stanley Cup playoffs. I can't help but root for this team over here, but it's not going to be that simple. Colorado had a rocky start to their season. There was a time where we thought there was the potential that they might miss the playoffs, or if they did make it, they may make it into the wild card. But with that said, they still returned so much of the talent that won the Cup with them last year, and then they added some more. Now, I thought at the beginning of the season that they would be hampered by the goaltending situation because they lost Darcy Kemper in free agency to the Washington Capitals, and instead they bring in Alexander Georgiev, keep Pavel Francouz as the backup. And it just didn't seem like that Georgiev was going to be able to live up to the same expectations that Darcy Kemper had just set. Well, guess who ended up being wrong? Me, like usual. And Seattle has built themselves just a really well-rounded team. There's no goal scorer out there that really stands out above the rest. You can make an argument for Jared McCann, but who's really the face of the franchise at this point? I don't think I could even answer that one for myself, but overall, they just play a solid style of hockey at all points. They're not particularly amazing at any one thing, but they are serviceable at absolutely everything. But here's the deal. Colorado is a number 1 seed for a reason. The Seattle Kraken, even though they have this weird mishmash of veteran talent and young up-and-comers, they are still a wild card for a reason. It's going to take them some time to gel as an organization, as a team, and have some playoff success. So if for no other reason than just experience, I have to say that Colorado is going to win this series in 6 games. Moving on to the Dallas Stars taking on the Minnesota Wild. Now, we got a good glimpse of what this Dallas team might potentially be someday in that 7-game series against the Calgary Flames last year. Especially Jake Ottinger. Nobody expected that young kid to step up quite in the way that he did. We all thought that there was going to be a massive goaltending gap with Ben Bishop basically being done with his career, Anton Hudobin getting shipped out, Scott Wedgwood coming in, but knowing that he probably wouldn't be the starter for that long if he was the starter at all. But you saw these glimpses of brilliance all along the way for a team that historically has not been near the top 10 in goal scoring. They've been a defensively minded team. Thank you, Rick Bowness, for that one. And it shows through their stars like Miro Heiskanen. But just what the doctor ordered ended up coming to the team in Jason Robertson. What a phenomenal breakout season he had. Now, granted, you could say that he was starting to put himself on the map last season, but if this season didn't submit that he is one of the league's future stars, I don't know what else to tell you. On the other side of the ice, you have the Minnesota Wild, a team that I so desperately want to succeed. Not only because of Marc-Andre Fleury, and I want him to get another cup ring. I want him to have success outside of Vegas after the way that Vegas treated him. And I knew it wasn't going to come from Chicago because it's Chicago, and we don't need to talk about Chicago. But it's another story of a young star who is going to make a name for himself in the league so many years down the road in Kirill Kaprizov. You can't help but root for the kid. But while the Minnesota Wild are arguably a top 10 defensive team, there's not a lot to get excited about on the offensive side of the puck. Let's remember for a second that they are below the league average in pretty much all the meaningful categories in offensive production, in goals for and shots and in power play production. I am a Dallas Stars hater. I can't stand them. And it really has nothing to do with the team itself. I mean, I don't run into any players on the street and they punch me in the mouth. Actually, there was kind of something that happened one time where a particular member of the Dallas Stars was a big old jerk to me in my place of work, mind you. My beef with them is all about their fans, and it's about the experience when you're in the stadium, and it's about that obnoxious song that plays every time they score, and I'm getting off topic. But if I try to look at this as objectively as possible, I don't see that Minnesota is going to be able to keep up with Dallas in the long run. Dallas is going to get a couple of goals from Robertson and from Pavelski, and then they're going to park the bus, just like they always have. Jake Ottinger will take over, and the series will belong to Dallas. Again, I love Kirill Kaprizov. I love Marc-Andre Fleury. I think there is success for them in the future, maybe depending on how much longer Fleury plays, but I got to take the Dallas Stars to win the series in 6 games. Moving on to the other side of the Western Conference, we have the Western Conference champion Vegas Golden Knights taking on the wild card number 2 Winnipeg Jets, who are really just thanking their lucky stars that they're even in this thing. And really, they shouldn't be thanking their lucky stars. They should be thanking their actual stars for this. Because when I look at the Winnipeg Jets, I'm going to quote Rebecca from Ted Lasso, and all I see is profound mediocrity. Winnipeg is average across the board in every meaningful category, really except for one, and that's goals against average. And who do you have to thank for that? Well, Connor Hellebuck, of course. Now, it's not only him. Goals against average is, of course, a team defense statistic. So let's also throw the fact in that you have Josh Morrissey that is competing for the Norris Trophy this year. And if it weren't for the fact that Erik Karlsson scored 100 points, I personally think he would be a shoo-in for it. Now, Winnipeg does get production from its stars up front, like Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor, Nikolai Ehlers when he came back from injury. But overall, I'm looking at a team that, as I said, is just kind of average. They're uninspiring. There's nothing really to love about the Winnipeg Jets outside of their goaltending. I thought that Vegas was going to regress this year. I thought surely they are losing enough pieces, and with their injury trouble, especially in the beginning of the season, I said there's no way they're just going to be hung out to dry. They picked up exactly what they needed to help fill in these gaps that were produced by injury especially. They made the kind of moves that they needed to at the trade deadline to address the things that weren't necessarily keeping them down, but were going to help bolster them to have as deep a run in the playoffs as they possibly could. So my biggest question that I'm left asking is who is going to start in net for Vegas? Now, when you're playing Winnipeg, I think you can get away with this. Well, we're going to try to rotate people in and out and see who actually works. But make no mistake, you can't do that in the second round. They need to settle on their guy early and ride that hot hand through the rest of the playoffs. And really, this series is going to get down to how often can Vegas solve the puzzle that is Connor Hellebuyck? And once they do, and they eventually will Winnipeg be able to mount enough of a force to come back and try to fight them on this one? I see a lot of people picking this series to be fairly close, but I honestly just don't see it. I think, as I said, Winnipeg is just an average team. We're going to see average hockey out of them, trying to be lifted up by Connor Hellebuyck, but they're going to end up falling. Give me Vegas in 5 games. And to round out the Western Conference, this is the series that I think is going to be the most exciting out of the West. It's the Edmonton Oilers hosting the LA Kings. These are two teams that actually addressed some glaring needs at the trade deadline. Both of them had troubles stopping pucks. Early on in the season, Edmonton could not rely on Jack Campbell. I'm sure they kind of regret paying him that salary now. Who would have thunk that Stuart Skinner would be the de facto savior of this goaltending situation here? Look back at his recent history and try to tell me when Stuart Skinner lost a game in regulation. It was back on March 11th against the Toronto Maple Leafs, a full month ago, that he lost a game in regulation. Oh, and the one I forgot to mention for Edmonton was going out and getting Mattias Ekholm to play some, actual defense along that blue line. And Los Angeles couldn't figure out their goaltending situation either. Jonathan Quick and Cal Peterson were just going back and forth, and there was nobody that was clearly better than the other. Their defense wasn't giving them a whole lot of help. And in comes, who was that? Phoenix Copley. But as soon as they figured out that they were getting rid of Jonathan Quick, they had to start asking themselves the question, can we rely on Phoenix Copley to get the job done in the playoffs? And they ultimately said no, and they went out and got Eunice Korpisalo from the Columbus Blue Jackets, thinking that Jonathan Quick was safely away. Well, guess what? But of course, the big story coming out of Edmonton this year is Connor McDavid is single-handedly willing this team to victory night in and night out. He put up, 153 points? And oh, by the way, he wasn't the only Edmonton Oiler to hit triple digits this year. There were 2 more. Can you name who they were? Of course, you can get Leon Draisaitl. That was an easy one. But can you guess who the third one was? I bet some of you said Zach Hyman, right? Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins actually ended up having a season like we kind of expected him to have back when he was drafted. Los Angeles was a team that I had actually picked early in the season to win the Pacific Division. I just thought there was so much talent that was up and coming on that team with the right mix of veteran leadership and guys like Kopitar and Drew Doughty and, I thought Jonathan Quick, that were going to help will them to a Pacific Division championship and maybe even compete for a Stanley Cup this year. Make no mistake, I think whoever ends up winning this series has a legitimate shot of making it to the Stanley Cup Finals and possibly even winning it. But I look at the two teams, and as good as they are and as exciting as this is going to be because of a rematch from last year where it took them 7 games, I look at the actual fire in Connor McDavid's eyes and his displeasure at not being able to hoist that cup. And he's going to be the embodiment of the Doomslayer from the video games. Rip and tear until it's done. And because of that, I have to give this series to the Oilers. Like I said, whoever ends up winning this series, I think represents the Western Conference in the Stanley Cup Final. Give me Edmonton and another hard-fought but exciting 7 games. Okay, now it's time for the East. I guess let's start with Boston and Florida. Do we really need to mention too much about Boston? Is there really a record that they haven't set this year about being the most outstanding in pretty much every category? So there's a part of me that is getting swept up in the story and thinking about how amazing Boston is and thinking they're this unstoppable juggernaut and thinking, wow, this core really wants to get one more Stanley Cup win before they tear it all down and end up having to rebuild. Then there's the division rival part of me that says, you know what? I don't think it would be the worst thing if we see 15 fights every game. And then there's a very hopeful side of me that says, when the last time we saw a team like this do this well, get ready for the playoffs? Yeah. It was the Tampa Bay Lightning when they won 62 games a couple of years ago. And do you remember what happened to them? Swept in the first round! Now, do I actually think that's going to happen this year? No, but it would be funny, right? It would be really funny. Come on, it would be funny. Florida Panthers had to fight for their playoff rights this year. They got embarrassed last year. They won the President's Trophy and got swept. Now, granted, it was in the second round instead of the first, but still. The peculiar thing about Florida is they're gelling at the right time. But the issues that were there last year are still there this year. And Florida's a team that consistently tries to outscore its problems, namely the defense and whatever version of Sergei Bobrovsky decides to show up. Make no mistake, playoff Bob is a real thing. I think that Florida can keep up in the goal scoring department with Boston on any given night, but there's no way that they can play the style of hockey and the type of defense that's going to be needed to outlast Boston for 4 games. Most likely it's going to be, well, if they were going to win, it would almost have to be 7, right? But so many people are calling sweep on this series. A lot of people are calling Boston in 3. I certainly think that Boston is going to win this series. They are clearly the better team, but I think Florida can poke a few holes in them. I'm going to give them 1 game. Give me the Boston Bruins in 5. All right, it's time. I don't want to do this. I don't want to pick this series. In a rematch from last year's 7-game series, the Toronto Maple Leafs are hosting the Tampa Bay Lightning. Let's just put this out there up front. If you are looking at this series, if you know nothing about either of these teams' history, this is an easy pick. Toronto looks better in almost every measurable category with the possible exception of goaltending. But as soon as you throw in what we do know about these teams from the last, let's say, 3 seasons on the Tampa Bay side and the last 20 years or so from the Toronto side, it becomes a lot more difficult to be confident in picking Toronto. Let's do a quick overview of that history. Tampa Bay Lightning, 3 straight visits to the Stanley Cup. 2 of them they won. The last one they lost in 6 games to the Colorado Avalanche. I went back and did the math, and Tampa Bay has played an extra 68 games over the last 3 seasons as compared to a team that didn't make the playoffs. They played almost a full extra season worth of hockey over the past 3 seasons. If they end up playing, another 14 games, if they're lucky to make it that far this season, they will have played a full extra season's worth of hockey in 4 playoff runs. You think there aren't some dings on that car right now? But Tampa's resilient. It doesn't matter what they seem to go through during the regular season. Their goal is to just get in, and they know exactly when to flip that switch, and they're going to be good to go. And I've had this feeling about the Tampa Bay Lightning before, that it was going to be a one and done. Eventually, this ride is going to come to an end. I was looking at teams that seem to outmatch them, like the Carolina Hurricanes, like the Florida Panthers from last year, like the New York Islanders, and I said, it's time. They're going to be done. And I find myself thinking very much in the same way about this series with Toronto this year. Toronto Maple Leafs, we all know the story at this point. They haven't won a playoff series since 2004. They had a first-round exit in the last 5 seasons, including a Game 7 loss to Tampa Bay last year when they were on home ice. And you just keep waiting, and you keep thinking, when is Toronto going to get over this hump? What is it actually going to take? Because I looked at last year's Toronto team and I said, that's a team that's built to win. So what's actually wrong with them? Kyle Dubas made a statement this year about going all in by virtue of his acquisitions across the entirety of the season. Getting guys like Ryan O'Reilly, who you can put on pretty much any line and have some success. Noel Acciari. Ilya Samsonov, by the way. Who saw that coming? Who thought that he was going to be as amazing in net as he has been when we all thought that Matt Murray was going to be the number 1 this year? And so I look at a Toronto team that was talented and primed for a deep run last year, and I see that they got better. They got a lot better. I think Steve Dangle put it best when we first found out that this series was going to be a thing, in that on paper, this is a series between a team that has been looking really bad, but nobody wants to believe is bad until they can prove it in the Tampa Bay Lightning. And then there's a team on the other side that is so good, and nobody wants to admit is good until they can prove they're good and get over this hump and win a round in the playoffs. So I'm left putting my hands up in the air because I genuinely don't know what's going to happen with this series. History tells us one story. Statistics and season play tell us something completely different. And I think we're all in for a wild ride regardless. This has got to be the hardest series for me to pick because deep in my heart, if Toronto was not playing Tampa Bay, I would be rooting for them against any other team that are in the playoffs right now. Any of them. I want Toronto to have some success because they've put in the work to get there. And I know exactly how this series looks on paper. I've consumed enough of the Toronto media to know that they're all picking Leafs in 5, Leafs in 6, some Leafs in 7s if their hearts can actually handle it. But at the end of the day, I'm left saying, Toronto, you need to prove it. You had a stellar team last year and you couldn't get the job done. You have a stellar team this year. You need to prove that you can get it done. If you can take advantage of a Tampa Bay team that I would argue is the worst quality that we've seen over these last 4 years, then I will be a believer in you. But for now, Call me a homer, call me biased, call me whatever you want. I'm taking the Tampa Bay Lightning in 7 games. I think there's something to John Cooper and that core's playoff magic. Someone's going to step up. Someone's going to step up and win them the series. Last year it was Nick Paul. I don't know who it is this year. Over to the Metropolitan Division. We have the Carolina Hurricanes taking on the New York Islanders. Right here is where you start to see a stark difference in play style from really the rest of the league. All 4 playoff teams from the Metro are in the top 10 defensively in all the meaningful categories. I think the lowest is New Jersey, and they're sitting somewhere around 8. And this is what we've come to expect from the Metro Division lately. You have defensively sound teams that just need a little bit of push on the offensive side. Carolina is another team that we just keep on asking, well, when are they going to get over that hump? Because as much as we give the Leafs so much flack for not making it out of the first round, Carolina has had their own struggles in getting out of the second round. The New York Islanders just a few years back went to back-to-back Eastern Conference Finals against the Tampa Bay Lightning, and then they regressed and missed the playoffs entirely last year before backing their way kind of into this season's playoffs. And the Islanders are a team that remind me a lot of like the Dallas Stars. They'll beat you by 1 goal. If it's 1-0, then so be it. But they get out there and they grind you. They play the boards. They are the style of team that you really just don't want to play. It's not fun to play against a team like the New York Islanders. Carolina is equally good, if not better, on the defensive side, with the exception of goaltending. I'm not sure I trust Frederik Andersen in the playoffs. I don't know that I really ever have, but I also don't know who you put in his stead. Do you give the pipes to Pyotr Kochetkov? Do you give it to Antti Ranta? I don't think so. You have to ride Freddie Andersen, right? But on the other end of the ice, you have Ilya Sorokin, who has year after year continued to put up Vezina caliber numbers. And the Islanders address some of their goal-scoring woes by going to get Bo Horvat from the Vancouver Canucks. So for me, this series is going to get down to who can put out more offensive firepower when they absolutely need it. Neither of these teams are particularly impressive when it comes to goal scoring. There's some great young talent on each side. I'm thinking of Seth Jarvis for the Carolina Hurricanes especially. But in a series where I could easily see them having a grand total of 15 to 20 goals across 4 to 7 games, I think Carolina is going to end up taking this one. It's going to be hard fought. I know that the New York Islanders are kind of a popular upset pick right now. I just think Carolina's built better for this series in particular. So because of that, give me the Carolina Hurricanes in, I hate to say it, but 7 games. And last but not least, the series that I think is going to be the most exciting in the East, the New Jersey Devils hosting the New York Rangers. Now, if this isn't the tale of 2 teams, then I don't know what is. The New Jersey Devils, nobody really expected them to do anything. We thought they were in full rebuild mode. They were acquiring pieces for a playoff run in the next 3 to 4 years, not immediately. And the New York Rangers were my way too early pick to go to the Stanley Cup, and I actually had them winning the Stanley Cup over the Colorado Avalanche back when I did this in September. So you have this brand new young team who nobody expects anything out of, and they say, all right, well, let's see how far we can take this. And you have another team in the New York Rangers that is just inching closer to that next step. They're ready. They can taste the cup because it's so close. And remember, they went to the Eastern Conference Finals last year. Once again, 2 defensively sound teams and 2 teams that really can keep up with each other as far as score and pace. The New Jersey Devils, they're fast, they're young, they're exciting. The New York Rangers are experienced, but they're equally fast, and they have that right touch when it comes to goal scoring. If not made better by the fact that they went out and, just got a couple of small names at the trade deadline. Vladimir Tarasenko and Patrick Kane. I saw those 2 trades come across, and I said, that's it. The Rangers win the East. They probably win the cup. I don't know who can beat the New York Rangers at this point. Now, if you want to call this letting them down, then you could say Igor Shesterkin has been up and down this year, and you would be accurate in saying that. For a goalie that is in and out one of the top, let's say, 3 goalies in the league, he's been a little bit more down than up. But he has had a resurgence in the last month and a half to 2 months, and I think he's primed for another playoff run here. Let's also remember the fact that these teams are separated by a river and just a couple of miles. They do not like each other. If there's bad blood anywhere in these Stanley Cup playoffs, it's between these 2 teams right here. And oh boy, I think that's going to be exciting. So this is another one where I'm kind of throwing up my hands and I say, on paper, it looks like the New York Rangers should run away with this. Maybe not run away with it, but the New York Rangers should have this one in the bag. They had the experience. They have the leadership from a couple of guys in particular that have won a Stanley Cup before, in Vlad Tarasenko and Patrick Kane. And on the other side, you have a young team who's playing like they actually have nothing to lose because nobody expected them to do anything. I don't know. I genuinely don't know what to do with this series because everything in my head is screaming at me to take the New York Rangers because they're just built better for this run. But there's something exciting about the New Jersey Devils, and I would love to see them push a little bit further on. So I'm going to let my heart get a little bit more invested in this, and I'm going to say give me the New Jersey Devils in an exciting but very grueling, with a lot of fighting, 7 games. And there it is. There's the first round. I can't wait to come back in a couple of weeks and see how wrong I was about everything except Boston. So what do you think? Who do you have winning all 8 of these first round series? Leave a comment for me in the comment box down below. And I will see you in a couple of weeks for round 2. And let's just say if Toronto ends up winning this series, I have to get rid of these nails. That's not a good look.